Less mind, more presence. High atop a mountain wrapped in clouds, where the whisper of the wind seemed to carry ancient secrets, stood the temple of Awaken. It wasn't a large or famous temple, but everything about it held the purity of what doesn't need to be shown. The wood creaked underfoot, and the scent of incense blended with the moss growing between the stones along the path. There lived a young monk named Daiji, whose name meant great compassion. Though he had been at the temple for 3 years, his mind still ran like an overflowing river. He thought a lot. He thought about his past, his family, the mistakes that had led him to the monastery. He also thought about the future, whether he would ever reach enlightenment, whether he was wasting his youth. His master, the elderly Ryoun, watched him quietly. One morning, as they swept the courtyard together, scattered with dry leaves, Daiji broke the silence. "Master, I meditate every day, study the sutras, practice zazen with devotion, but my mind won't quiet down. Keeps talking, judging, comparing. What more can I do?" Ryoun set his broom aside and pointed to the leaves slowly drifting down from the trees. "Do you see how they fall effortlessly?" Daiji nodded. "The mind, when it clings to thoughts, drifts away from reality just like a fallen branch drifts from the tree. To find peace, you don't need to control your thoughts. You just need to stop feeding them. Less mind, more presence." The young monk furrowed his brow, as if trying to understand with the very mind he was told to quiet. Then the master bent down, picked up a leaf from the ground, and held it gently in his palm. This leaf doesn't ask why it has fallen. It doesn't resist. It simply is. Daiji looked at the leaf, then at his master silently. "For today," Ryoun said as he picked up his broom again, "sweep without thinking about sweeping. Don't think about how to do it better. Don't think about whether the ground is clean. Just sweep." The young monk obeyed. At first, his mind still raced like a bell ringing after being struck. But little by little, as he focused only on the movement of his arm, the sound of the leaves, the touch of the broom on the damp stone, something shifted. It was as if the mind, when not called upon, began to fall silent on its own. That afternoon, Daiji sat quietly beneath the ancient ginkgo tree by the temple pond. He had finished sweeping without complaint, without worrying whether he had done it well or poorly. He had simply done it, and though his mind still whispered thoughts, something inside him felt different, less restless, more still. Master Ryoun approached silently, as he always did. He carried a small iron teapot and 2 rough ceramic cups. Sitting beside the young monk, he poured the tea without a word, and together they sat in silence while the steam rose between them, dancing gently in the cool air. "How do you feel now?" the master finally asked. Daiji hesitated. He thought about saying good, or calmer, or less anxious, but all those words felt insufficient, or perhaps unnecessary. "Present," he said at last. Ryoun nodded slowly, like one who watches a seed planted long ago begin to bloom. "The mind seeks to understand," the master said as he sipped his tea. "But presence doesn't need to understand anything. It simply is." "And what if the thoughts come back?" Daiji asked. "They will," the master replied with a gentle smile. "They come like clouds, like wind, like waves on the pond. The mistake isn't that they appear. The mistake is in chasing them, making a home for them, turning them into who you are. You are not your thoughts, Daiji. You are that which sees them come and go." The young monk lowered his gaze to his cup. He watched the steam rise and vanish into the air. He didn't try to hold it. He didn't judge it. He simply watched. Then the master picked up a fallen twig and tossed it into the pond. The twig floated effortlessly, gently turning with the water's movement. "Do you see it?" Ryoan said. It doesn't swim, it doesn't struggle, it doesn't sink. It surrenders completely to the flow. That is how the mind is when you stop thinking about it. Daiji felt part of him wanting to ask more, to delve deeper, to analyze. But another part, deeper, quieter, held him back. And in that moment, without realizing it, he had taken another step toward wordless understanding. That night, Daiji didn't immediately retreat to his futon. Instead, he walked barefoot along the wooden corridors of the temple, guided by the faint sound of crickets and the scent of damp wood. The oil lamps cast a soft, golden, flickering light inside. He passed by the meditation hall and stopped before the tokonoma, where a scroll hung with a single calligraphy character, Mu, the word for emptiness. He had stared at it so many times that he had stopped really seeing it, but tonight, something about it felt different. Not like a concept to decode, but like a silent presence that didn't ask to be understood. He sat down facing the scroll and closed his eyes. He breathed. He felt the air flow gently in and out of his lungs, without force. Each time a thought tried to pull him away, he returned again and again to the present moment, to the sensation of his body, the touch of his clothes, the enveloping silence of the temple. And there, in that stillness, an image arose, his childhood. He remembered his mother preparing rice, the sound of the knife on the cutting board, steam rising from the pot. He remembered her calm gaze, her welcoming silence. And then he understood something he had never seen before. It wasn't the rice that made him feel loved, nor the act itself, but her full presence as she did it. She wasn't thinking about anything else. She wasn't absent. She was completely there, wrapping the moment like a cloud wraps the moon. That presence, Daiji realized, was the deepest teaching. It wasn't in books or sutras. It was in doing without pretense, in being without interference, in living without separation between the act and the actor. When he opened his eyes, the room was the same. The scroll hadn't changed, but he was no longer exactly the same. Outside, the wind stirred the bamboo, and the night seemed to nod in agreement. At dawn, Daiji rose with the first toll of the bell. His body was still heavy with sleep, but strangely, his mind did not resist. There was no struggle against drowsiness, no fight with the morning's chill, just movement, just the now. He stepped into the garden before the formal meditation began. The sky was just beginning to lighten, and mist floated softly among the stones lining the path. He sat on a moss-covered rock and simply breathed. The birds had yet to sing. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ryoan appeared shortly after, walking slowly, carrying the small bowl of water he used each morning to water a plant growing by the back wall of the temple. It was a plant with no flowers, no special shape. No one ever noticed it. "Why do you always water that one?" Daiji asked, breaking the silence. The master bent down and poured the water gently. "Because it's alive," he replied, as if that were explanation enough. Daiji said nothing more, but he understood. It didn't need to be beautiful. It didn't need to be useful. It didn't need to be noticed by anyone. It was alive, and therefore worthy of presence. He watched as the water soaked into the roots. His mind tried to pull him away with memories, doubts, thoughts about his practice, but every time he caught himself, he returned. He returned to the sound of water, the subtle trembling of leaves, the damp earth's scent. Ryoan watched him silently. "Sometimes we think awakening is something far away," the master finally said. "A place to reach, an achievement to gain. But awakening is not a destination. It's a decision you make moment by moment. It's choosing to stop living in the mind and come back to what is." The sun began to peek shyly over the mountains. The light touched Daiji's face, and for a moment he was no longer a meditating monk. no longer a striving disciple waiting for wisdom. He was simply a being breathing in the morning sun. And in that moment, without words, he knew he had understood a little more of what cannot be taught. In the days that followed, Daiji adopted a new way of being. It wasn't that he had reached enlightenment or that his mind had completely stopped, but he no longer clung so tightly. When thoughts came, he let them pass. When emotions arose, he didn't judge them. He had learned to see with the eyes of the now. One day, while gathering firewood in the forest near the temple, he found himself thinking about the past, about his former life, unkept promises, the times he had failed others and himself. The old habit of the mind returned, seeking drama, seeking blame. He stopped. He held a branch in his hands and examined it closely. The bark was cracked and covered in lichen. It wasn't a beautiful branch, yet the tree had released it when it was no longer needed. It didn't hold on, and he thought, "This is how I should let go of my thoughts, like the tree lets go of its branch, without judgment, without blame, without attachment." He took a deep breath and let the branch fall to the ground. In that simple gesture, the forest seemed to nod once again, said nothing, explained nothing. It was simply present, just like him. That afternoon in the sutra hall, Ryoan called Daiji. "Tomorrow I want you to go down to the village," he said. "You need to bring rice to the old man Ichiro." It was the first time in a long while that the young monk would leave the temple. At dawn, with a bundle of rice slung over his shoulder, he descended the trails leading to the valley. Each step was an opportunity to practice presence. He didn't allow his mind to rush ahead to what was coming, nor to get tangled in what he had left behind. He simply observed the bird songs, the crackling of branches beneath his feet, the scent of the earth. When he arrived at Ichiro's house, an old man who lived alone beneath a gnarled cherry tree twisted by years, he was greeted with a toothless smile and bright eyes. "You've grown," the old man said, "but your eyes are calmer. Before you looked like someone searching for something. Now, you look like someone who has stopped." Daiji remained silent. He didn't know what to say, but it wasn't necessary. They prepared some tea together and shared white rice beneath the cherry tree. Ichiro didn't speak much. He simply sipped his tea and watched the sky with a serene expression. "Do you know the secret to peace?" he finally asked. Daiji looked up, curious. "It's not thinking you need anything more to have it." The young monk nodded slowly, letting that phrase settle inside him like a leaf floating gently to the ground. On the way back, a light rain began to fall. At first, he thought about running, about sheltering, about staying dry. But then he remembered the master's words, and the old man's. So he simply walked under the rain, feeling each drop, not wishing the sky were any different. The water ran down his face, mingling with sweat, and for the first time in a long time, Daiji felt completely free. Free from his mind, free from effort, free from himself. Just a body walking in the rain, just presence. Back at the temple, already soaked through, Daiji paused beneath the eaves of the main entrance. Water dripped from his robe, forming small puddles on the polished wooden floor. But he didn't rush to change or dry off. He simply stood there, feeling. The freshness of the rain still tingled on his skin. The scent of wet earth filled the air. Nothing was missing. Nothing was too much. Ryoan watched him from the inner gallery. He said nothing, but his gaze was clear, like the falling water. When Daiji entered, the master waited with a dry towel. He offered it without a word, with a slight bow. In that simple, perfect gesture, Daiji felt again what he had understood days before. True presence needs no words. It is care, attention, being fully in the moment. Later, during the meal, Ryoan spoke. "Tell me, how was the journey?" Daiji paused for a moment, not to seek answers, but to touch what he had lived. Quiet, he said, not because there were no sounds, but because there was no interference within me. I walked, I felt, I observed. I didn't try to understand everything. And yet, I felt I understood more. The master smiled softly. That is silent wisdom, he said. It doesn't come from thinking, it comes from being. That night, as they cleaned the kitchen utensils together, Ryoun broke the silence to say, thoughts are not enemies, but they are not reliable guides. They are like a frightened child who talks nonstop. If you listen too much, you will end up just as confused. But if you take their hand, without letting them drag you away, you can both walk in peace. Daiji reflected on that image. So, how do you take the thoughts by the hand? With presence, the master answered without hesitation. You don't need to push them away or run from them. Just observe. Acknowledge they are there and return to the now. Return to the breath, to your feet on the ground, to the bowl in your hands. There was a long silence. Ryoun placed a freshly washed bowl on the shelf and added, every time you choose to be present, you clear a layer of dust that covers your true nature. That night, in the stillness of his cell, Daiji didn't fight his mind. He didn't try to force calm. He simply lay down, listened to the distant song of a frog in the pond, and let the moment completely embrace him. For the first time, the inner silence was not something he had to reach. Simply was. As the days passed, Daiji's practice stopped being a practice in the strict sense. It was no longer an exercise done at certain hours, in certain places, under certain conditions. It had become more of a way of living. Of course, the mind still appeared. It distracted him, recalled memories, anticipated what was to come. But he no longer got tangled up so deeply in its game. He observed and returned, as if he had learned the invisible art of coming home again and again. One morning, Ryoun led him to a clearing in the forest where an old persimmon tree grew, solitary and twisted, its branches thick like the arms of an elder. Today, don't meditate sitting down, the master said. Today, learn from the persimmon. Daiji stood quietly, contemplating the tree. Its leaves were broad, a deep green. A few ripe fruits hung, ready to fall. The sunlight played among the branches, casting shadows on the ground. What should I observe, master? Nothing, Ryoun said firmly but kindly. And everything, just be with it, without seeking lessons. Without expecting answers, just shared presence. The master walked away without adding more. Daiji sat beneath the tree. At first, his mind wanted to turn the scene into a symbol, to search for hidden meanings. What does the tree represent? Wisdom? Strength? Solitude? But then he remembered, less mind, more presence. So he let the breeze brush his face, let the distant crow's call reach him. Let the tree simply be, like him. And something curious happened. Without thinking of anything in particular, his heart filled with an inexplicable tenderness. As if the world, just as it was unadorned, effortless, were perfect. The tree didn't try to grow. It didn't try to ripen its fruit. It didn't worry about its shape or whether anyone was watching. Simply was. And that was enough. Hours passed without Daiji noticing. When Ryoun returned, the sun had already begun its descent. What have you learned from the persimmon? He asked. Daiji looked at him with a serene smile and said, nothing I can explain, but much that I now understand. The master nodded. He asked no more. That night, during the tea ceremony, Ryoun offered the bowl differently, not with the usual gesture, but with both hands, bowing his head more deeply. Daiji understood. It was a silent acknowledgement, not of achievement, but of presence. And as he held the warm bowl between his hands, he realized he no longer sought to empty his mind. He had learned how not to fill it. Autumn came to the Hirakuin temple quietly, without fanfare. One morning, the trees began to dress in red and gold. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the air held a clarity that seemed to cleanse the soul as well. In the stillness of the cooler days, Daiji walked the same familiar paths, yet everything along them felt new. One afternoon, while pruning the rock garden near the South Pavilion, a visitor approached. He was a young traveler, restless-eyed, who had spent days journeying between temples in search of teachings. "Are you the master?" he asked upon seeing Daiji. "No," Daiji replied, smiling without pretense. "I'm just someone who tends this garden. I've visited many places," the young man said, setting his backpack down. "Everyone talks about letting go of the mind, about being present, but I don't know how to do that. How do you live without thinking so much?" Daiji set the rake aside and sat on a sun-warmed stone. "It's not about living without thinking," he said. "It's about not losing yourself in what you think. The mind is like a bell that rings when struck. But you're not the sound. You're the one who hears." The traveler furrowed his brow, as if trying to grasp the idea with his mind. Daiji noticed and went on. "For a long time I thought too much too. I wanted to understand everything, control everything, even my spiritual practice. But I realized the more you try to grasp life with the mind, the further you get from living it. Like someone analyzing a flower and forgetting its scent." "And what did you do?" the young man asked. "Nothing special," Daiji said. "I started living with my body, not just my head. Feeling the air, tasting the rice, listening to the silence. Not thinking about what I should feel, just feeling." The traveler was silent, moved. "Is that all?" he asked after a moment. "That's all," Daiji replied. "But it's also all you need." A long, gentle silence fell. The young man lowered his gaze and nodded, as if he didn't fully understand, but sensed truth in what he'd heard. Before leaving, Daiji offered him a cup of tea. They spoke no words while drinking. They were simply there, two human beings sharing the moment without hurry, without pretense. And in that simple instant, the young man understood more than in all his reading. When he said goodbye, Daiji said, "Remember, less mind is not less intelligence. It's more clarity. And more presence is not more effort. It's more surrender." That night, as every night, Daiji returned to the garden to gaze at the stars. He wasn't looking for answers. He didn't expect signs. He was simply breathing. And in the heart of that moment, without past or future, without mind dividing, without self-demanding, he discovered once again the oldest of truths. Everything you seek is already here. You only need to be here too.